Book 4, Falcon in the Barn, Chapter 16. Who gives gifts like this? As the horses lurched to take the wagon back to Edge, Mari turned around one last time on the bench. Perrin waved again and gave her a look that said, "Trust me." He promised he would be home for dinner tomorrow and that she didn't need to come check up on him again. She felt a little guilty about seeing him this morning, but her relief that he was fine outweighed the guilt. She knew he wouldn't have been able to stay within his confinement. The smell of action would be too strong, and he'd violate any decree to do what he thought was right. But before Mari and the children left, Perrin pulled her aside to the empty command tent. "To be honest, I'm a bit concerned about how all of this may be interpreted. Although we were successful, once word of this reaches Idemia, well, Mari, how would you feel about being married to a 44-year-old lieutenant?" She gripped his muscled bicep. "You still feel the same to me." He startled her by stealing a quick kiss and whispering, "I love you," before he escorted her to the wagon. She glanced down behind her at the 3 wounded soldiers resting in the bed of the wagon. The most seriously injured had been sent back hours ago. These 3 had mostly superficial wounds, but they couldn't walk or ride well. Perrin insisted on sending his family home with this last wagon of injured. He didn't want them going home with the dead, and he received no argument about that from his wife. Pato sat in the wagon bed, chatting with a corporal who had a wounded leg. The soldier used to live in Idemia and had watched the champion kickball team. The young man talked about plays and strategies and people Mari didn't know. But it didn't matter. Pato was happy. She had just turned back around when she heard Pato say, "When we move to Idemia, I'm going to try out for one of the teams." Mari gulped, even though her mouth had gone dry. She subtly leaned back to eavesdrop on the rest of the conversation. "When do you think you're going?" the soldier asked Pato. "Soon as they make him general. I guess I can wait a couple of years, though. I need to improve my defensive game." "I heard it'll be a lot sooner than that. Some were saying last night he's definitely going to be promoted now because of what happened." "Yes!" Pato exclaimed. "Perfect!" Mari fought down a worried whimper, reminding herself that corporals didn't decide transfers and promotions, and glanced to her side to see if Jatesy had heard. But Jatesy's mouth was moving as if she were carrying on a conversation with herself. She stared intently ahead, oblivious to anything else. Mari had been waiting for an opportunity to talk to her. She'd seen Jatesy tending to Lemuel Thorne before he was brought back to the fort. And while Mari had no real reason to not trust him, except that he was the son of Ursula Thorne, for some reason she just didn't like the young captain. He had looked at Jatesy with an earnestness that Jatesy didn't return. At least, not yet. Mari prayed silently again. "Dear Creator, I know it's not as if there's one perfect man out there for her, but could there be some other option sent her way so that Lemuel isn't her only choice?" Mari glanced around again. On the bench before her, the driver of the wagon was busy in conversation with his relief driver. Behind her, Pato was exchanging more strange words related to kickball with the soldier, and the 2 other injured soldiers were snoring quietly in the bed of the wagon, despite its jostling. Mari assumed they must have been exhausted or sedated. Her daughter was trapped by her side for the next hour. Good as time as any. Mari patted Jatesy on the leg. "Doing all right? Quite a day." "What?" Jatesy blurted, as if Mari had just pulled her out of some faraway thought. "Oh, I'm fine, yes." Mari tried again. "I was quite pleased with how well you did. The sight of all that blood and the burns. A few times I had to go take a break. Some of those men really took a beating, didn't they?" "Yes, I suppose. It wasn't that bad, really. All of them seemed to be smiling." Mari chuckled. "Smiling at you?" Jatesy rolled her Perrin brown eyes, but then turned to her mother. "You really think so?" Of course! What wounded man wouldn't be thrilled to have a beautiful girl fawning over him? Jatesy faced forward again, her long ponytail cascading over her shoulder, where she caught it and fretfully fingered the braid. I don't know. Sometimes it just seems there aren't any right men in the world. Plenty of men, but not the right ones, you know? Right one for you? Jatesy nodded. I mean, I know I need to seriously consider what's before me, but Jates, you have time, Mari exclaimed, but quietly so as to not disturb the soldiers around them. You're only 16. There's no need to rush, trust me. Mother, I really don't want to wait another 12 years to find my husband like you did, Jatesy exclaimed quietly back. And I don't want to get married next week either. I just wish I knew when and who. Oh, don't we all, Mari sighed. The biggest decision one can make, and you don't even know when you get to make it. It's not all up to you, I'm afraid. But that's also good, she decided. It's got to be the Creator's timing. He knows when we're ready to find a good match. I wouldn't have wanted to marry your father if I'd met him in Edge when we were 18, and we weren't ready for each other at 27 either. It took us time to become the person the other would love. You're probably not ready for him yet, or he's not ready for you, but both of you will be eventually. Jatesy twisted to face her mother. Something in her words had certainly pricked Jatesy, but Mari didn't understand why her daughter wore an expression akin to pain. Not ready yet, Jatesy muttered. She sighed and faced forward again, gripping her ponytail. Mother, how did you know Father was the one for you? Mari had been waiting for this question, but she thought she had a few more years to prepare for it. Your father wasn't the one for me. I don't believe in that. There were a couple of men I've been attracted to over the years, before and after him, she confessed. But he was the one I chose to love. Not only was I attracted to him, but I loved his mind, his spirit, his personality. How? Jatesy turned to her. I mean, you hardly spent any time with him alone before you were engaged, right? It was through the debates that you fell in love with him, so how did you know everything else about him? She's got me there, Mari thought, scrunching her lips. They really did have an unusual courtship. It occurred after they decided to marry. She'd often wondered why she'd said yes to his proposal. As flimsy as it sounds, the idea just felt right. And then there was her father. I didn't really know much about him, that's true, Mari conceded, but I felt he was a good choice, and I never felt that way about any other man. And there was something else. Jatesy, my father liked him. Jatesy started to respond until she thought more on what her mother just said. Grandfather Pato? I hate to ask this, but wasn't he already dead? Mari smiled. Yes, he had already died. But when I need his guidance about something that's important, I still feel him. And marrying the right man is very important. The first moment I saw Captain Shin, I felt my father distinctly, and I had the impression that he liked this man. And he's told me that many times, even after we were married. And he's also told me that I should always trust my husband, which has been a little hard to do this last year. Jatesy nodded in agreement. But I should also always have faith in him, too. Trust your father, Jatesy. I guess if there's any man that he likes, you have his blessing to love him. Jatesy sighed again. Any man that father thinks is worthy of finding or saving? Mari hesitated. All right, she said, trying to understand Jatesy's odd phrasing. Perhaps. Jatesy blew out heavily, as if she were having a hard time catching her breath that afternoon. I still have more time, she said more to herself. Mari massaged her hands, realizing that she was missing something. Shem returned from moorland in the afternoon, but it wasn't until later that night that Perrin finally got him alone. Perrin had been briefed by Fod about the fire to destroy the remaining structures and received the final count of the dead. But there was one more piece of information that only Shem could supply. I saw Jatsi talking to you before she left. What did Lemuel say to her when she was changing his bandage? Shem started to twist his face into an odd configuration. No, Perrin stopped him before Shem rearranged all of his features. She didn't say not a word, did she? Shem searched his memory. You're right, she didn't. Good. I was having a hard time figuring out how to do this one. So? Shem smirked. Your thorny little friend said to your daughter, your father thinks I'm worth finding and saving. I hope you will think so too. Please save me, Miss Jatsi. Perrin scowled. Oh, that's awful. That's the best he could do? Good. Shem pointed at Perrin's expression. Exactly the same face she made when she told me. Granted, the boy had been under sedation most of the night, and likely didn't have a lot of time to prepare something less sappy. What was Jatsi's reaction to him? She didn't look impressed, from what I could tell, Perrin said, but she nodded slightly. Should I be worried about that? Shem shook his head. I wouldn't. She's starting to recognize his manipulation. She asked me if it would be her fault if he wasn't saved, whatever he meant by that. I told her only Lemuel was responsible for Lemuel's successes and failures, not her or anyone else. She seemed to accept that. And then he paused. She said if you had known what he tried to do to her in the barns, you probably would have left him to die on the field. Perrin released a low whistle. Oh, for a second, I considered it. Shem folded his arms. So why didn't you? Perrin couldn't have been more surprised by Shem's response. He actually sounded disappointed. Why didn't I? Because he's still my responsibility. Because I have a duty to protect him. Then Perrin smiled partway. Because then I was also struck with the thought, not today, some other battle. Deep in the forest east of Moorland, 4 men dressed in mottled green and brown clothing picked up the body in blue uniform and brought it to the wide crack in the ground. It was the last to go into the bottomless crevice, which had already swallowed dozens of garters, who died as the soldiers chased them last night into the woods and into their waiting blades. The dozens of other men in concealing clothing watched silently as the 4 hefted the old man, swung him over the chasm, and released his body, letting it tumble to depths unknown for a burial not to be commemorated. No words were said over the body of Benef. No words should be said for a traitor. Late the next night, Perrin was thrashing in bed again. Mari next to him wasn't worried or disturbed, but was chuckling. Do you really realize what we've done? He asked for the 6th time. I do, Perrin. You destroyed the garters. It was only now that it hit him, now that everyone was back safely to their forts, after the dead soldiers were given a proper burial, after the injured were secured and recovering, after the borrowed horses were returned, and the trees remained exceptionally silent. Now that he went to lay down in his bed for the first time in a few nights, it finally hit him. Over 100 years of terror might finally be over. He sat up abruptly again, pulsating. I mean, true, we need to wait to see. Probably a year, I'm afraid, to make sure that there are no other attacks and that they are truly gone. But then? In an effort to try to relax him enough to sleep, Mari sat up to massage his shoulders. But even as broad as they were, she had a hard time finding them because he fidgeted so. And then, she answered his question, then the world can be declared a different and better place, We may not even need forts or the army anymore. Who's there left to fight? Even more than that, Mari, he bounced in enthusiasm. The world can be declared open. She stopped trying to rub his shoulders. Open? What do you mean by that? I've been thinking about this for a while. He turned eagerly to her and tried to search out her features in the dark. Remember on our second wedding anniversary when you came up with a ridiculous plan to go through the garter land and find a new place to settle? She swallowed down a lump that appeared in her throat. Yes? Well, it wasn't a ridiculous plan, and I apologize now for ever thinking so. Remember how my grandfather went over the wall to free the servants? Oh, Perrin, she whispered, in anticipation and anxiety. I know where you're going with this. You want to find Terrap's land. And more. Mari, if there are no garters, what's to keep us confined here? Poison? The entire world simply can't all be poisoned. Mari hugged her legs, suddenly very nervous. Remember something else from that discussion we had on our anniversary, that garter women have many children. I've thought of that too, he said, now on his knees and ready to bounce through the roof. We got that information years ago from the delusional garter that Shem was talking to. I never trusted him, and soon after that he vanished. Consider this. The rumors have always been that garter women and children were armed, but never in the entire history of fighting garters have we ever seen women or children. I had Fod and Shem look specifically at the garter dead in Moorland, and all they found were men, ages late teens up to middle-aged. Mari swallowed again. Here's my theory, he plowed on. Those who raid from us, they're cast-offs from their own society that exists somewhere far, far away, maybe even hundreds of miles from us. They don't even know about us, like we don't know about them. These men, though, are maybe thieves or murderers and were booted out. They wandered and happened upon us during the Great War, then assumed the role of garters. They've been using us to survive ever since. That would explain their poor communication, their lack of consistency, their changing strategies. They're just a bunch of criminals, and they recruit others to join them from among us, like they did with Riplac to make their jobs easier. When Mari didn't say anything, he gently shook her shoulders. What's wrong? I thought you'd be all over this. If the vast majority of them are gone, their power is stripped. They're finished. Even their local recruits will surely be scared out of compliance with them. She couldn't move. It was a fantastic theory which, if true, would open possibilities no one had considered before. But she knew something that he didn't. There were garter women. Well, at least one, who chided Mari to tears and out of the forest 13 years ago. But she couldn't confess that to him, and while she sat stewing, a terrible thought came to her. What if that woman's sons had been killed in Moorland? Or her husband? For absolutely no logical reason whatsoever, thoughts of Rector Young suddenly filled her mind. She shook her head to dislodge him and focused back on her husband, who was now bobbing like a 4-year-old in search of a convenient bush. I am all over this, she assured him. I'm just stunned, which wasn't exactly a lie. I just never thought of anything like this before and need to let it sink in a bit. Wait, if there are no garter women, how are there garters now? More cast-offs, he said easily. Maybe this is how that civilization deals with their criminals, by throwing them out. They keep coming here generation after generation. Isn't that amazing? That they loot us? That we're finally putting an end to all of this. She sighed wearily, wondering how that garter woman fit into any of this. The words she said to Mari that night long ago still didn't make any sense. All I do is save lives. Whose lives? Where? There were so many variables missing to this equation that Perrin was trying to write, and it wasn't as if math was Mari's best subject to begin with, but after midnight, her ability was even more diminished to figure out all of the parts, especially ones he didn't know were supposed to be in there. "Oh, Perrin, I just don't know," she confessed, truly dismayed. "I mean, I wish—" She was startled by him suddenly kissing her on the lips. I know. There are so many possibilities, and we have to wait. It's a mess in my mind, too, so just think about it, Mari. Help me get to the bottom of this, and maybe in a year or so, should there be no more garters and no more need for defense, all kinds of marvelous things could happen." She could even hear him grinning in the dark. He practically lit up the room. She could never tell him what she knew, or what she did so many years ago, even though she thought he'd understand and even forgive. She was just too prideful, and she was ashamed of that. Not ashamed enough, however, to confess to her husband about sneaking off to the forest and running back home a coward. She came up with a perfect avoidance strategy. "In the meantime," she said, hoping she sounded coy, even though her mind was reeling, "maybe something marvelous could happen now." And she kissed him back for so long that he forgot all about talking for the rest of the night. The next evening, Perrin put away his paperwork and picked up his cap to go home. He decided that morning, while Mari was still dozing on his chest, that he had to put aside the possibility of no more garters, because the idea filled him with too many possibilities that completely sidetracked him. But as he looked around the office, he was struck with the idea that maybe, just maybe, in a year, this fort might not even be needed. Well, not as a defensive structure, but perhaps instead as a jumping-off point for those brave enough to explore the mountains to the north. Because, he realized with a growing smile, they'd need a guide through the natural hazards, and who better to serve as a guide to the forest than Perrin Shin, former colonel of the former army. He had to stop thinking like that, because the grin on his face was just too wide. But perhaps people would think he was happy for many reasons. First, all the wounded soldiers were healing. Second, nearly the entire village had got wind of what happened in Moorland, and they were waiting yesterday to give the returning soldiers a hero's welcome. And also to make sure they got their borrowed horses and wagons back, because Edgers, while grateful, were also practical and a bit distrustful. Third, Edgers' surprise and joy at the success in Moorland inclined them to be more willing to plant extra crops to fill this year's local storehouses. The file Perrin put away was an updated list of villagers who had signed Ofra's commitment sheet today. Then fourth, and best of all, Captain Thorne's injury meant that he was unable to climb the tower stairs for at least another week. Oh, yes. For the past year, life had been scowling at him, but today, it smiled upon him again. And now he was going home. Maybe. He sighed as he saw Shem bounding up the stairs to his office, sheets of folded parchment in his hand. "Heading home?" Shem asked. "Trying to. But you'll want to see this." "Walk home with me. Eat dinner with us. I promise Jatesy's not cooking tonight. Then come back to man the tower." Shem smiled at the invitation and handed Perrin the file. He opened it as they headed down the stairs. "Fod's report already? We just got back yesterday." He didn't want to waste any time. He was even dictating it to his assistants when we were cleaning up in Moorland. He wants Ida Mia to see his report before they get word from anyone else. As they walked through the compound, Perrin skimmed the facts sheet. Nothing like the grim tallies of the injured and dead to bring one out of one's future fantasies. These numbers look right. Confirmed garters dead, 267. Assumed dead in the explosion, 40 plus. Prisoners, 0, naturally. Soldiers wounded, 151. Soldiers dead, 36. Soldiers missing, 14, including Benef. The garrison will see those as acceptable ratios, as if lives can be reduced to ratios. Read the next page, Fod's description of what happened. I'm avoiding that, can't you tell? You'll enjoy it, I promise. Perrin sighed and turned to the next page. He held it at an angle to catch the last of the sunlight as they left the fort's compound. A minute later, he moaned, "What has he done?" Shem began to laugh. "It's beautiful, isn't it? Grayson should have been a poet." Perrin cleared his throat. Colonel Shin acted out of intense concern for the welfare of the citizens of Idemia. His immense devotion extends not only to his village, but to the surrounding villages, and more importantly, to the administrators, High General of Idemia, and the General's immediate family. Oh, please. Right here, read this. Shem pointed further down the page. It's my favorite. Why you broke probation. Out of heartfelt fatherly concern. Oh, hold me, Shem. I may swoon. Shem laughed. Perrin tried again to read the words that churned his belly. Out of heartfelt fatherly concern, Colonel Shin violated the orders of his probation to ascertain the welfare of his youngest officer, Captain Lemuel Thorne. Oh, not a poet, Shem, a writer of fantastical fiction. He continued. Shin felt that more important than holding to his confines was the need to ensure that each of the men under his care was successful in his first major endeavor. Not only did the valiant efforts, Perrin paused to shake his head, of Colonel Shin save Captain Thorne's life, as several witnesses can verify, see their attached testimonies. Fod is very thorough, Shem pointed out. But his unsurpassed skill also preserved the life of Major Jordan and at least a dozen other soldiers. Perrin slapped the papers. Nico's not going to buy this. We need to make revisions. Shem's face contorted with pained amusement. It's too late. What do you mean? It went out already, early this morning. This is a copy. The original should be in the hands of Chairman and Cush right about now. No, Fod, Perrin yelled, as if he could be heard and quake. What were you thinking? Shem handed him a small note. Perrin read it out loud. Colonel Shin, you may wonder what I was thinking. He paused to scowl. Fod can also now predict the future. He's a talented man. You may wonder what I was thinking when you read the report. It would be unrealistic to assume that all of the men would keep quiet as to your whereabouts. The truth would get out eventually. We might as well be the ones to present and control it. Remember, you said I could explain the situation as best as I recalled it. I'm sorry I didn't get to find out exactly why you chose to break your probation, but I assumed my explanation was probably as accurate as any. Get ready to buy a new jacket, General. Major Grayson Fod. Perrin put the note in the file and folded it with a frustrated sigh. Maybe the sooner the forts could be shut down, the better. You don't want to read the rest? Shem elbowed him. Some riveting stuff in there. I came off looking quite well, and apparently Thorne dispatched someone before he got hit, and nobly. I'll read the rest later when I've got nothing better to do. Perrin grumbled as they turned down the alley to his home. The men hopped over the back fence and walked up to the back porch. Got room for another for dinner? Perrin called as they walked into the kitchen. Always. Mari patted Shem's arm as he came in. Mari, I've got some great reading for you, Shem said, pulling the file out of Perrin's hand. No, 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 gimme that. Perrin lunged for it vainly. But Mari snatched it out of Shem's hands. If he doesn't want me to see it, then it means I really should. She opened the file, and Perrin, resigned to the fact that she would have finagled it away from him sooner or later, started for the gathering room. Wait, Perrin, Mari cried. I need to warn you. But her warning came too late. Perrin stopped dead in his tracks at what he saw on the rug in the gathering room between his teenagers. For the first time in his family's life, they heard him swear, and loudly. What the slag is this? With his hands on his waist, he glared at the small creature that stared up at him. His perfect day was now perfectly ruined. Instantly, Mari was at his side, taking his arm in a pretense to calm him, but more likely to keep him from drawing his sword. Shem had followed close behind Mari, his hand on his own hilt, expecting the worst. He stopped suddenly as well, and his shoulders relaxed as Perrin's tensed. Ah, it's so cute, Shem crooned. Why, that kitten can't be more than 5 weeks old. Perrin shot Shem a look full of daggers before turning to his 2 shocked teenagers, sitting next to the tiny cat, their mouths wide open at hearing the word only the coarsest of soldiers ever uttered. I know what it is, he said darkly. I want to know why. The black and white kitten offered up a pitiful mew, and Pato scooped it up. He didn't mean to scare you, he said to the kitten. He held it up to his father. Look at that face. Tiny little nose, whiskers. Come on, admit it. It's cute. It's a cat, Perrin snarled. Why is it here? Pato looked at Jatesy, who was cringing. It's a gift, she murmured. Who gives gifts like this? Perrin bellowed. Mari now gripped his sword arm with both hands. It's a thank you gift, she said gingerly, from Captain Thorn. Thorn? I don't think he meant anything by it. A cat? Wanna bet? Still cringing, Jatesy held up a piece of paper. This was in the basket the messenger brought this afternoon. Perrin snatched it out of her hands. Shem read aloud over his shoulder. Miss Jatesy, this lonely little animal was found lost and wandering in the surgery wing. All it needs is someone to love and care for it, someone to save it, and it will turn into a devoted creature that will adore you until the day it dies. When I saw it, I thought of you. When you care for it, please think of me. Thank you for your tender care on the field. Yours devotedly, Lemuel. Shem's voice developed a sneering quality halfway through the message, which grew into disdain with the final 3 words. Mari, I've lost my appetite permanently. Perrin sat down on one of the stuffed chairs and crumpled the note in his hand. He held it up. Sorry, Jates. Did you want to keep this? She quickly shook her head. Give me the cat, Perrin ordered. I'll take care of it. Never had 5 words sounded so final. No! 4 people shouted at him. Father, said Jatesy tentatively, I'd like to keep it, not as a remembrance of Thorn, but because it has nowhere else to go. How about the river? He suggested. Perrin! Mari snapped. He held up his hands. Seriously? You all want to keep this thing? The kitten wriggled out of Pato's hands and walked clumsily to Perrin. It sat down in front of his boots and gave him a pitiful cry. Ah, he wants you, Father, Pato said. Perrin remained unyielding, staring at it. It wobbled to the side of the upholstered chair and began to climb it with its needle-like claws. No, don't do that. He pulled the kitten roughly off the cloth and was surprised by how light it was, its thin ribs poking out of its paper-thin skin and fur. Not knowing what to do with the fragile thing, he dropped it on his lap. It mewed again, curled up into a ball, and began to purr. Perrin glowered at it. His family smiled at him adoringly. "My father had a theory about cats," Mari said. "No matter how many people are in the room, they always find the person who hates them the most and try to win him over. Colonel Cuddly, you have a kitten." Shem turned to her. "Colonel Cuddly?" Mari turned pink, remembering that she had never used that name in front of Shem. "I best check on dinner. Children, make sure your father does not take a walk with that kitten." And she darted into the kitchen. Shem raised his eyebrows at Perrin. "When you're promoted, will you be General Giggles?" "You're no longer invited for dinner, Zenas," Perrin said steadily. "You may leave now and take this with you." He pointed at the ball of ragged fluff on his lap. "Oh, Father," Jatesy crawled over to him and took the kitten. "If we really need to, we can find it a new home tomorrow." "It needs a name," Pato said, petting its head with his finger as it rested in Jatesy's arms. "No, it doesn't," Perrin protested. "Give the cat a name, you get attached. And why are all of you still touching it?" Shem sat down on the floor with Jatesy and Pato and pulled a short rope from his pocket. He dangled it in front of the kitten, who batted at it awkwardly. The three of them laughed when the tiny cat got a claw caught in the rope. "Sergeant Major Giggles," Perrin muttered. Shem shook his head. "Doesn't have the same ring to it. Sorry." The kitten stayed through the night, somehow wobbling its way out of Jatesy's room, struggling up the stairs, wandering into Mari and Perrin's bedroom, and climbing the blankets up the mountain-like span to reach Perrin's chest, where it exhaustedly curled up in the middle of the night and purred loudly. Mari didn't hear it over her husband's snoring, but she did hear him bellow, "What is this?" She sat up, alarmed and confused, until she heard the purring. Trying not to laugh, she explained, "It's a baby animal that feels you can protect it." "Get it off me, Mari." She scooped it up. "It's really a sweet little thing." "It's a cat." "Oh, just give it a chance, you giant falcon." Perrin growled. The cat mewed back. In the morning, it followed him everywhere. Perrin almost put an end to the entire issue when the kitten climbed onto the sofa just as he was about to sit down on it. "Stop!" cried Pato, pulling his father away. The two of them turned to see the tiny black and white face meow up at them. "You nearly crushed it!" Pato scooped up the kitten. "Yes, that would have been a problem," Perrin sighed. When he came home for dinner, the tiny cat was still there. It hobbled up to him and began to climb his trousers. "Get it off!" he yelled, shaking his leg. Mari extracted the kitten from his knee. "Honestly, how can a grown man be so afraid of a tiny kitten?" "Afraid? That's what you think I am? Afraid?" "Yes. Give me another reason why you run in terror from it." "I don't run." "Well, you shout." "That's ridiculous. You're shouting now." "So are you. Give it to me." Mari clutched the kitten to her chest. "What will you do?" "Prove you wrong," he beckoned. "Hand it over." "Don't hurt it." "I won't hurt it. Just hand it over." Reluctantly, Mari gave him the kitten. Perrin held it up to his face. It mewed in a manner that sounded like a whimper of fear. Perrin stared into its tiny eyes. It stared back, then looked down at the height at which it was dangling. It flailed in fright, so Perrin cradled it in his other hand, and the thing began to purr. "Why does it do that?" he asked, bewildered. Mari's mouth twitched. "Because it likes you. I can't imagine why, but it does." He evaluated the creature. It didn't resemble a thorn, captain, or general in any way. It was just a tiny, helpless animal with needle-like claws, and it made annoying sounds, although quietly. Still, those claws were unreasonably sharp, snagging the wool on his uniform. Still, yet again, it was just a baby. He said eventually. Fine, it can stay. He handed it back to Mari, who kissed him gleefully. But it doesn't need a name. And that's the end of the chapter. Thank you.